Jim Harbaugh's future. I think there seems to be this prevailing notion that no matter what happens in this game, that this is going to be it for the Harbaugh era. Part of it is because Jim Harbaugh has consistently flirted with NFL jobs in the past, even when circumstances around his program were different, whether that be, suspensions that he served or championships to be played for. But also, too, you have the Spygate thing that's looming over Michigan's program. They're kind of in this all-in moment where, whatever happens later, we'll deal with when that time comes, but we're trying to win a title that you can never take away from us. It seems to be this very interesting personal storyline with the head coach who, really got his program from good to great. He was asked
underrated,
about
before
that.
we move on, underrated factor with the Harbaugh thing, you got a roster that's getting ready to basically completely turn over. And not enough people are talking about that. Like, if you're going to leave, I feel like that, more than the suspension, more than the NFL opportunities, like, they're not going to be this good next year. So,
and as easily as it's been to kind of roll your eyes at the notion that, stars matter, which we'll get into a little bit more in the show, one thing that stars still unequivocally do is give your program an opportunity to bounce back from mass exoduses of talent year over year to be a competitor. And even if Michigan has built this team that has 15 potential draft picks on it or more, it's very hard to rebound from losing that talent when it goes. So unless you have 20 top 100 players who are more ready to start early in their careers than Michigan probably has on their roster. So yes, I think this is all part of it. Jim Harbaugh was asked multiple times at the podium, I believe, on Sunday morning during the joint head coach press conference, but then also, at media day on Saturday. And Scary
he said he's going to leave, right?
Comment,
he said, this is my last game as Michigan head coach, right?
It's one thing that's scary. Well, I mean, it was that you wait till you hear what he said if you haven't heard it yet. But
it's very good.
Scary Gary. Michigan also has a brutal schedule next year. Their schedule is really brutal. And I don't know if that matters, but if you don't have a team and then you have to play that schedule, there is a chance it could be a five. I think that both of these teams legitimately could be 500 teams next year.
Ari, we need to recalibrate what a difficult schedule is, though, because we're going into a new era of the SEC and the new Big Ten. Everybody's schedule is going to be hard. It is what it is.
No, Michigan's schedule is exceptionally hard.
They do have the non-conference game. They got Michigan at home. I mean, they got Texas at home, right?
But I believe they play Texas in the non-conference, and that alone is difficult. They play Fresno State in Ann Arbor, which, if you're playing a team that used to be a group of 5 team or however you wanted to phrase it, they're always a pretty tough team. Then the following week, you're playing Texas in Ann Arbor. Then 2 weeks later, you're playing USC at home. Then 2 weeks after that, you're playing Washington in Seattle. Then you have Michigan State at home 2 weeks later. Then the week after that, you're hosting Oregon, and then 2 weeks after that, you're going to Ohio State. Like, that is like a schedule.
Oh, they play Ohio State next year?
Yeah, in Columbus. I don't know if that's a big game or not in your mind, but it's going to be a big game for them. That's just a tough schedule, man. And like playing the Washington team that you're playing in the national championship game might look like a tough game on. I don't know what these teams are going to look like next year. But I think Texas is going to be very good again next year. And playing Washington, I mean, they got USC, Washington, and Oregon all on the same schedule, adding into 2 rivalry games with Michigan State and Ohio State. Regardless of what you want to say about recalibrating, that is a unquestionably difficult schedule for anybody, whether it be the 14
It is, but we do need to recalibrate what is a hard schedule.
Well, a hard schedule in the past used to mean 4 games with good teams, but like they have 6 or 7 next year. So. And that's also not taking into account that, you never know how good like Illinois will be or, Minnesota. Like every now and then those teams have good years. So you can't just, put those in as bye weeks. But when asked about his future, here's what Jim Harbaugh said.
People are wondering about the future of Michigan's football program. You're obviously a big part of that. And I know the administration wants you back. Have you told them and assured them that you will be here after the season?
Yeah, there's a calendar. I'll gladly talk about the future next week, and I hope to have one. How about that? A future? I hope to have one. Yes. Thank you.
It's kind of morbid.
Well, it's like, who was the NFL coach that somebody, it's like the old joke when people say they're day-to-day. It's like, well, we're all day-to-day. But who was the coach? It was an NFL coach. Maybe it was Kyle Shanahan. I forget. Was asking about like is so and so going to be there next week? It's like, well, the world could end or something like that. I forget who that was. I'm sure the comment section will hit us up and figure that out.
Dave, just let me roughly translate that in English. Mm-hmm. I hope to have the future roughly translates to I hope I don't die tomorrow, right?
Well, I think it's a creative way to not answer a question that you really can't answer.
A creative way?
Yeah.
Here's a creative way. Let me give you a creative way for
Harbaugh's not exactly not exactly a normal person.
No, so here's a normal coach's reaction. The future is always going to be a main fixture in my thought process, but we have made it to a point in the season that we haven't made it to in the history of the playoff era and since 1997. We are 100% one-track focused mind. He likes to say that a lot. Focused on this game. There will be a time and place for agents and contracts and discussions to be had. I love Michigan. I've given it everything I've had since I've been here. And once this season is in the rearview mirror, we will get back to the table. We will discuss my future and we'll see whether or not that's the best for me or whatever. I don't know. You can say things that aren't weird.
Can you? Have you met Jim Harbaugh?
I don't know. I mean, we are going to get into more weird Jim Harbaugh discussions on the podcast, but I hope to have don't we all hope to have one?
Sure. Yeah. I think so.
I hope to have one.
That's a fair assumption, I think. We got NCAA coming out next summer, Ari. We can't.
Well, let me ask you, what do you think?
We got to live to see that.
What do you think he's going to do?
If you in October to the early part of November, I was like a lot of people. I thought it was a foregone conclusion that this is done. This is the last year. Throughout Jim Harbaugh's tenure, San Diego, Stanford, 49ers, the thing kind of runs its course. Like, Jim Harbaugh seems like he's not the easiest guy to work for. Seems like it's not the easiest organization with his head on it to be underneath. And sometimes you just got to hit the reset button. It seems like that's kind of been his MO. Not that he bails on things, but just like after like 6 or 7 years, it becomes time. It becomes clear that
I will push back on that though, Dave. There aren't a lot of coaches, outside of like Nick Saban and such that stay, Dabo Sweeney's, guys who have won championships that stay in a job for 10 to 15 years all that regularly anyway.
But if you're winning and they'll have you and you're at a destination job, they do.
But
that's just the first.
They are winning. Really, they will have him and he's at his destination job. Now, whether or not you ask him, if the NFL is actually his destination, I think based on his behavior, the past few years that he seems to have an inkling or a desire to go back to the league. And if that's where he's happiest and where he wants to be, then I understand that. But all three things, if you look at the longest tenured coaches, most of them in college football, they have very similar resumes and accomplishments at their program that Jim Harbaugh now has. They love him. He's the son of Ann Arbor, right? He played there. They could be national champions in 24 hours or 36 hours. And they want to have him around. And during a time in which it'd be easy to lose track of those things, during the sign stealing scandal and, other things where he served suspensions this year, you could grow sour on them. It almost seemed like Michigan became more steadfastly supportive of him. So this isn't a, situation where this isn't 100% entirely up to him, unless there's stuff coming out that we are unaware of. It's just a matter of whether or not he wants to go to the league. And in fact, here, Dave, I think you could make the case that Michigan is the place that has more longevity for him in terms of keeping him around as the head coach than any NFL job. Because if he goes to an NFL job and they don't make the playoffs for 3 years, which is really hard to do in the league, you're fired. And I
think he wants to win the Super Bowl. Like that's a thing. That's a thing.
Winning the Super Bowl is a thing, and getting on the doorstep and losing to your brother has got to be a tough thing to have to live with. That said, I am personally hoping and rooting for him to stay because I think the sport is better with him as a character.
I agree. The sport needs personalities. It's hurt when we lose those as a whole. But I sort of get it. I mean, I think the Chargers, wherever they're at now, they're in LA, right? And then the Vegas Raiders would be the two that obviously are the ones that they sort of hear the most rumors about. But they have to actually decide to hire him, which is no guarantee either. He went for the Vikings job. Was that last year or 2 years ago? Did not get that one. So there's a lot of moving parts here. If it was me, if I'm a betting man, I would say he's probably gone. I think the lore of the Super Bowl, not wanting to stick around to find out whether, how hard the NCAA is going to come down on him for two separate situations that are neither of which have been fully resolved. I don't know that if I have other opportunities that I can just walk away from this problem and let somebody else deal with it, I probably might do the same thing. So,
and I don't know if he is
gone.
All the things that you could say about Jim Harbaugh too, his weirdness makes him
awesome.
A bizarre fit for recruiting, I think. And like being around the Big Ten recruiting space for as many years as I was, I had heard things like he relies extra heavily on his staff. He isn't necessarily the closer that other coaches are because, he doesn't really convey things the way that normal people do. And he might not like it. I mean, I don't know, but like on the flip side of that, if a recruit likes him, then it's great and it works. But there is, just like there is with every other coach, not everybody is for everybody. And, some players might be more moved by what Nick Saban has to say, and some players might be more moved by what Jim Harbaugh has to say.
Well, it's
there's one unquestionable thing here, real quick, Dave.
Go ahead.
Is that everybody who plays for him loves him. Like, I don't really feel like there's a lot of players leaving the Michigan program saying he was a terrible coach. He didn't love us. He's obviously out there being a proponent for, the financial aspect of this. He said repeatedly that he believes that revenue share should be a part of the college game.
That's bolder than people think it is. He said it a handful of times, but there's not a lot of coaches that are beating the table like that, and it's not new.
And what he says, I actually think makes rational sense too. Like
somebody was tweeting about it that he was pushing the Stanford players to unionize. I think was it Sam Schwartzstein? I forget who it was.
Or like to practice more, that they need more practice or something.
They would like to get rid of the 20-hour rule, but also like you can agree.
Which is like also the other way, the exact opposite direction of that. But it is certainly an interesting discussion, which would get us into our next point. And if you're listening here too, guys, we are going to get into more Washington stuff too. I just think this is a really important topic as we go into the game. What is your take on Jim Harbaugh's legacy?
Well, he's done what people thought he was going to do. It took a little bit longer. I think the way that they have performed in the back half of this season, I can't speak for everybody. There's always going to be, capital H haters out there, which I think at this point you kind of have to be. But I think based on what I have seen in the back half of the season, I'm sure it probably helped, but I don't think that the Connor Stallions, the sign stealing stuff meaningfully impacts how we view the rebuild at Michigan, right? It was a lot slower than people thought. It didn't go well there for a long time, but these last 3 seasons, I think what they've done in the last 5 or 6 games since firing him, since this has all kind of gone down, has validated what they have done these last 3 years and getting to 2 playoffs, winning the Big 12, beating the crap out of Ohio State 2 years in a row, and then beating them this year in a close game, and then finally winning a playoff game. I don't think it's house money. I think you got to finish the drill here on Monday night. But if you win that game, it's hard to draw up a better scenario if you hired Jim Harbaugh, 9-10 years ago, however long it was. I mean, if you could have bet then that Michigan was going to win a national championship under Harbaugh, I would have taken that bet. It's played out, it's obviously a slower start, but the intellectual brutality, the Stanford teams under Andrew Luck, these Michigan teams look a lot like those teams. They play a lot like those teams. And so I think in terms of his legacy, he did what he was hired to do, is to rebuild Michigan and flip the rivalry. So you got to deserve credit. And I think that that's something that he will be remembered for.
The thing that I think is interesting too, Dave, is that if you would have asked me maybe 3 years ago or 2 years ago,
after the 2020 season,
the quarterback trends that we had with Trevor Lawrence and Tua and all these guys, you would almost have thought that the only way you could win a national championship in the new era of college football is to possess an offense and to play the way that Washington does, and to have a quarterback that is a not only productive player in college, but a bona fide future NFL star. And the fact that Michigan was not only able to build the roster the way that they do it without the crazy recruiting results, as we've talked about quite a bit, but also without changing their style and who they are, not wholeheartedly like bringing in an offensive coordinator to play 5 wide every play, and like that intellectual brutality, the ghost of that is also how you would view Michigan's program for not just the Jim Harbaugh era, but before. They want to play hard. They want to play physical. They want to run down your throat. They want to be efficient. They want to make good decisions. They want to know who they are and play within who they are. And not only do they not change it, they proved that they could beat Alabama doing it that way. And the thing that we've always talked about with Nick Saban and Alabama is the ability to adapt and to create and foster environments that are willing to move towards where the game is moving. And I'm not saying that Michigan hasn't done that, but Michigan is more like Michigan 7 years ago than any other team probably is who they were 7 years ago. And they're playing and probably going to win the national championship.